Hi everyone. The focus of this lesson, social control. Pay attention to information you'll find on the 14th page of your third study guide. And as always, there's supportive information in your textbook in chapter 6. What exactly is social control? Well, you can take a look at the definition at the top of the 14th page, and that's about as good as it gets. Social control really refers to the means, the ways through which groups and societies prevent and at the same time punish nonconformity to the norms, the rules, and the laws. The end result of social control, social order, which again in any society, large or complex, is a quite remarkable accomplishment. You ever been in a heavy-duty traffic jam or in a really crowded retail store during the holiday season? Well, you have to be alerted to the occasional jerks, but what's really interesting to me is that most people behave in an orderly fashion. Without social order, groups and societies simply can't function. Now we're going to look at some major forms of social control, and I'm going to go initially beyond the two you see in the study guide, formal versus informal, and talk first and foremost about what might be referred to as internal social control. This is something that's linked to socialization. Via socialization, we incorporate, or as Ferrante says, take as our very own and accept the norms, the values, the beliefs, and the expectations of the groups as well as the society of which we are a member. And then we follow these in everyday life because we consider them to be right, good, and proper, and because we want to. In other words, we do the right thing because we internally know what the right thing to do is. And we don't do something because we know that's the wrong thing to do. Simple example, illustrated in an earlier lesson. Most of us, most of the time, don't steal. Not because we're afraid of getting caught, okay, but because we've come to regard stealing as inappropriate. Now, external social control really relates to the use of sanctions. Remember our earlier discussion of sanctions way back when we were analyzing culture? Sanctions are punishments if we don't conform to the norms, or they are rewards we receive if we do follow the norms. And external social control is largely comprised of negative sanctions, punishments, those punishments that proscribe some behaviors. Okay? Plus, again, the sanctions carry with them very specific details as to how we're going to be punished. Now, sometimes you want to bear in mind again that that's not always true, that the sanctions don't necessarily carry in great detail what's going to happen. Ever happened to you when you were very, very young? Either your mother or your father says to you, just wait till your mom comes home, just wait till your father comes home. And you're left there stewing, wondering what in the world are they going to do to me when they arrive. But remember, external social control involves the application or the use of sanctions. Now, social control can also be considered formal and informal. Study the definitions or the explanations of these two that you'll find on page 14. Now the formal, and I really kind of like this diagram because formal social control we're generally aware of. Informal social control, not necessarily so. But if you want to elaborate a bit on informal social control, take a look at the information noted here. Once again, we're linking how we think and how we behave to a degree, to the process of socialization. Informal social control can be the chewing out. You with me? The dirty look. Or it might take this form. You ever threatened with this in the months prior to Christmas? Now, on the other hand, formal social control is more elaborate. It's something that more often than not we are aware of. I found this, and it's applicable. And there are lots of interesting examples from a film that some of you might have seen, A Knight's Tale. You might remember that the hero, played by Heath Ledger, toward the end of the film, is discovered to be a commoner, and he's put in the stocks where the general public throws trash at him. That's an example of formal social control, as is this: surveillance systems that have become more and more common as such. But you also want to bear in mind that formal social control often involves the legal system, as well as police force, the military. And interestingly enough, there are those instances, and I find this always quite fascinating, where informal and formal social control kind of comes together, such as this one, where a thief has been mandated to publicly display what, in this case, she's done to the public. Now, on the one hand, it's been dictated by the courts, but on the other hand, it's sort of an informal type of social control, one that is still widely practiced by the old order Amish. This is public embarrassment, but it's also, to a degree, shunning. Now, bear in mind, if you will, that a variety of different factors figure into the process of social control. It begins with, as you will note here, socialization. And we talked a little bit about this before. In general, people tend to abide by the rules, even when these rules are arrogant, petty, outdated, contradictory, oppressive, or just downright stupid. So these rules don't have to be sound and fixed as such. Now, in totalitarian regimes or repressive governments, political indoctrination controls many aspects of the lives of the citizens. In these societies, there's an enormous amount of pressure placed on citizens to conform. But you want to remember something that we analyzed in earlier lessons. Socialization is imperfect. It's never complete. We're all born with different potentials. We all are exposed to different socializing influences, and we interpret these influences in different ways. And we often confront unusual or novel situations in which we have to improvise, come up with new and imaginative responses. Now, groups, because socialization isn't complete, groups sometimes come into play and, again, exert a real influence when it comes to social control. Notice again in the study guide that primary groups are going to employ more often than not informal sanctions, gossip, ridicule, and in some cases just ostracizing, that is, kicking the person out of the group, as you see here. On the other hand, secondary groups tend to employ more formalized sanctions, established prizes and penalties. So you get an award at the workplace, if you will. Okay? Now, what is also important for you to remember, and I think it's very, very significant, don't overlook this, is that once we join a group, one of the first things we have to learn is that group's language, its lingo, if you will. Now, all groups have a particular way of talking, collectively referred to as argos or argots. Think of them again as special group languages. Sometimes they can be highly formalized. You are learning in this class the formal argot of sociology. But on the other hand, slang, catchphrases, are also classic examples of argots. How do these work as to enforce social control or as social control procedures or devices? Well, on the one hand, you want to remember once you join a group and you start talking according to the standards of the group, you are in effect identifying yourself as a member of the group. So argots serve as an effective source of group identity. Secondly, they tend to make in-group communication a lot more effective, a lot easier. I'm going to use an outdated term here, but it applies. Think of argots as sort of an in-group shorthand, where one word or one phrase may stand for or represent something that is really complex and multifaceted. Okay? Like this. The notion that one comes to believe that his or her culture is superior to all others. Therefore, the person tends to evaluate all other cultures by the standards of his or her own because they believe theirs is the best. Now that's over 30 words I just laid on you. Isn't it a lot easier, at least from the standpoint of sociology, to employ the term ethnocentrism? Think of slang words. Cool. With it. You know exactly what these mean. You don't have to go into elaborate detail. The members of your group know exactly what you mean when you employ the term. And then last but not least, argots protect the group from outside interference. They serve as sort of a, if you will, a wall around the group. And what's interesting is that sometimes the group may use words that are used by outsiders, but completely reverse the meaning. A few years ago, particularly among teenagers, the word bad was implied or used to mean good. The word tough was used to mean something attractive. And think about obscene words. Okay? If you've never spoken them, those that you've heard, like the so-called F-bomb, well, recognize it doesn't refer just to a biological function, but it has a multiplicity of meanings. Some can be positive, some can be negative. So once we pick up argots and start using them, we are in part conforming to the expectations of the group. Now, force can also be employed. Particularly in large, complex societies, force may be employed in a variety of different ways. Perhaps through the use of designated agencies, such as the police force or the armed forces. But it's very important for you to remember that too much force can sometimes give rise to, again, even more nonconformity. It can literally blow up in the face, so to speak, of the very society and groups that are trying to control, in some form or fashion, deviance. A good example of this is sometimes the criminal justice system gets involved in what might be thought of as over-criminalization. Let me give you a couple of examples I came across. 3 fishermen in Florida were sentenced to more than 6 years in prison for importing lobsters packed in plastic rather than in paper. A North Carolina person was jailed for 45 days for selling hot dogs without a license. Now, it's important for you to remember force can be effective in keeping people under control, that is to say, encouraging social order, but it can sometimes blow up in your face. Last but not least, situational determinants. How you and I interpret the situation, the meanings, the parameters that we pick up on. Kind of a classic example of this, as far as I'm concerned, is you go into your first high school class and it's Mrs. So-and-so. And figuratively, just to get your attention, she pulls out a 2x4 and laces you between the ears. But then you go in, next period class, to Mr. So-and-so's class, and he doesn't care if you take the building down brick by brick, just don't bug him. Once you read those two situations, is that going to have an impact on how you behave? In certain situations, the parameters are fuzzy. We're just not certain what we're supposed to do. In other situations, it's glaringly apparent we better do this or we're in deep trouble. So keep these ideas in the back of your mind. They'll help you to appreciate the next topic we're going to get into, one of the most fascinating in sociology as far as I'm concerned, deviance.